Okay, and this is Senate Government Operations, and we're starting today with looking at the governor's executive order that we think he just lifted right out of our bill S-124. So I'm glad he's reading our bills. And we have with us Commissioner Sherling, and I see today Matt Birmingham actually has a face. Usually he's just this little white thing like that, or a telephone. And Ingrid Jonas is with us, Major Jonas. So and I don't know how long we'll take with this, and then we'll look at Betsy and we'll go through some of the House changes that have been made up to this point with 124, so we can keep abreast of that. And then at 3 o'clock, we are moving into a different virtual room, and we're going to join the House General and Military Affairs to hear from General Knight and Ed Stanek and Richard Kapinski. That was wrong, but I know it was, but you know who I mean.
Anthony? That wasn't too bad, actually. That wasn't too bad, actually.
Okay.
Shapolinski.
Okay. So that's the drill for today. So let's start with looking at what the governor's executive order means for 124 and how, if there are differences, how will we resolve those, and just kind of walk through that. So Commissioner Sherling, if you would like to just lead this discussion, that would be great.
Oh, I will do my best, Senator. And if lifting is the greatest form of flattery, I think a lot of this actually originates with our the 10-point strategy that we put forth in right. June, and I think shared is probably the best way to describe it.
You are right. I think that many of us are going in the same direction, and the fact that they kind of all converged right now and so I would say, Commissioner, if you want to kind of just take it away here, and I would say if Matt and Ingrid want to join in at any time, that's kind of, this is your show for a while. Okay.
Okay. I'll be brief. And I haven't done a line by line comparison of the differences necessarily in terms of the executive order. I've done a high level side by side section analysis. So I'll work from that. Both the executive order and 124 have a section around best practice for hiring and promotion. On the executive order side, due on the 1st of December, but actually we're planning to deliver a package, I believe we're going to do everything that was on the executive order list, some of which was due October 1st and some December 1st. We're planning to try to deliver all of that on October 1st, with one exception, and that relates to the training section of the executive order. And that's only because we are still awaiting the arrival of an executive director for the Criminal Justice Training Council. So it doesn't seem fair to do that in the absence of a director. So with that side note, relative to timelines, we're planning to deliver some templates around hiring and promotion for October 1st. In S-124, there's a section this is all under Section 10A. Sub 1A directs the LEAB to do some similar work. And I'll just go line by line, and then we'll come back if that makes sense, or I can stop at your discretion.
Committee, what would you like to do? Would you like to go through all of it or ask questions as we go along?
Either way.
Let's go through it all then, and then. Okay.
Yeah, I think going through most. Good.
There are two report outs in the governor's executive order, one on the data system and one on body-worn cameras. There is a report out on body-worn cameras in 124, again, 10A subsection 6. There is a section in the executive order on a statewide use of force policy, which would include the circumstances under which quote unquote military equipment would be utilized in the governor's executive order. There is a component of that, the military equipment component is subsection 7 of 10A in 124. There is a report due to the governor on training in the executive order, and there is a more broad assessment of the Criminal Justice Training Council and some additional items in sections 2A and 2B of 124. So there's a place where there is a difference in scope in particular that I'll call out. While I said I didn't have line by line, there's a couple areas that stand out as having a different scope of work, and that's one of them. There is the next section in the executive order has a direction to develop some ideas around a statewide investigative model for internal investigations. I don't have a note indicating that is in 124, although there's some community oversight. So I'll bolt these two together for a moment. There's also a direction to deliver some model community oversight concepts to the governor in the executive order, and section 3 directs of 124 of subsection 3 of 10A and 124 directs the Attorney General to work with stakeholders to do the same. There is a section in the executive order that directs us to report. These are I'm sorry, I just conflated two things. One is direct delivery of the investigative model, and that community oversight component is directing us to propose a legislative model. So they're in two different sort of large sections of the executive order. One is directing reports and action, and the other is directing legislative proposals. So I apologize, I conflated two different approaches with two different things there. Under the section that's legislative proposals, I mentioned one of the three, which is the community oversight models, which also exists in 124. There's a direction around a proposal for universal reporting portal and a methodology for the release of data around investigations in law enforcement in the executive order. Subsection 4 of 124 contemplates similar action, and the governor's executive order asks for some models around models around use of force investigation and review, and I don't have a note indicating that that's in 124 specifically. So that is that's the high level overview of the sections of the executive order and how they relate to 124.
So I just have two things. In 124, when these are addressed, it asks for different groups to get together. We tried to think who would be the most appropriate groups to work on each of the issues, but certainly it could be expanded to include other groups and other agencies or departments. Is that the same? Does the executive order ask for the same input from, or expectation of input from outside groups such as LEAB and the Human Rights Commission and different groups?
It does. The very first short-term priority is community participation, and we've started some of that process. I think the methodology we're hoping to employ here is to frame up the ideas. So rather than just go out to the communities and say, what do you think about topic X? Mm-hmm. Go to them with some framed concepts for feedback. So it's a little more galvanized process from the outset. So that's the approach that we're taking. And
then I guess unless people have other questions, if you would like to expand a little bit on the training issue. But first, I guess, does anybody have any questions about where we are so far? It sounds like we're kind of all headed in the same direction here. Brian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Betsy might be able to answer this. Is there anything in 124 and in the executive order that puts things at odds, that makes something not work the way either side had intended? I didn't ask that very well, but I think you know what I mean.
No, you did. And it was good.
Yeah, hi. For the record, Betsy Ann Rass, Legislative Counsel. Hello, everybody. The only thing I agree with you, Madam Chair, and with the commissioner, if he mentioned it too, it does seem like the governor and the legislature are looking at the similar issues in both the executive order and S-124. The one place where I thought that there might be a conflict is that in the executive order, there is language for there to be a recommendation to the Criminal Justice Training Council as to a model body camera policy. And in S-124, as passed the Senate, the proposal is for the LEAB to maintain its authority to create its model body camera policy. The General Assembly required the LEAB to create one in 2016. S-124 would require the LEAB to consider any revisions to it. And then as passed the Senate, the language would say that starting on January 1, 22, any agency that authorizes its officers to use a body cam has to comply with the LEAB policy. Whereas its executive order, the proposal was for the Criminal Justice Training Council to create a model body camera policy. I'll just note that on the House side, in House GovOps, their current draft would transfer the model body camera policy from LEAB to the council, which would be consistent with the governor's executive order.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I should just add, Madam Chair, that wasn't a specific mindful attempt to transfer. It's just the way the language landed without contemplating the existing language around the LEAB.
So in coming up with this, though, could we assume that you would at least consult with the LEAB since that is one of their roles?
Yes, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but the same folks that serve on the LEAB largely serve on the Criminal Justice Training Council.
I know.
So it is tough to extricate those two things from one another.
It is, I don't know if the same thing happens up there, but it reminds me of down here, we have so many nonprofits and so many organizations and so many boards that you can be in one meeting and then go to the next meeting and all but one person goes and there's one additional person and then you just it's a lot of the same people. So
you have
I
to be
appreciate
careful
that.
not to have an inadvertent quorum and have a meeting by accident.
Yes, Betsy Ann.
I'll just note to put it on everybody's radar that S-124 would substantively amend the membership of the Criminal Justice Training Council. So it would, if enacted as currently considered by House GovOps, look a lot different than it does today, whereas the LEAB would remain nearly as it is now, which is more of a focus on law enforcement related members.
Okay, when we get there, I would like you to go through that, what they're considering changing. So, Anthony?
I just want to ask a very basic question. I mean, obviously, we're working on just two different things going on here that are very parallel. And I'm just wondering what's the difference between, I don't mean the practical difference, I don't mean like specifically the elements of them, but we have an executive order which becomes implemented when the governor executes it. We have legislation that has to be approved by everybody, signed by the governor. I'm just wondering, will the question be like, why are we bothering to do this if the governor's already done it or vice versa? I'm just wondering which one of these, how they interact with each other.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think the view that we had was not knowing how complex the work was going to be for the General Assembly coming back into this unusual session. The governor wanted to keep the momentum going on these key areas, so that's why the executive order was issued. It does provide, I think, an opportunity for us to, if we were to put the legislative components on pause for 90 days, gives us an opportunity to do a bunch of work that's already in motion. You'll then have the benefit of being able to review that work and then contemplate which components you'd like to move forward with or modify, or may not be necessary given the outcomes of those things. So to put you in a position of advantage in January to have a more in-depth conversation about some of these things, that's an option.
And the force of law is similar for both? Betsy, is that the same force of law?
No.
In the executive order and S-124?
Yeah, I mean, executive order lasts as long as an executive order lasts, as opposed to legislation, which goes on forever.
Well, so the executive order is, as I see it, and Commissioner, I don't want to mischaracterize this, so please correct if I'm not giving an accurate characterization, but it's recommendations to the governor as I see it overall. Whereas S-124 is requiring miscellaneous entities to provide recommendations to the General Assembly for future legislation that the General Assembly might consider. But then S-124 also imposes actually many substantive changes. But if we're looking at the recommendations aspect of only S-124,
Yeah.
I think generally it's the executive order requiring recommendations to the governor, which the governor might then propose to the General Assembly after the governor considers those recommendations. Whereas S-124 is requiring a variety of entities to report directly to the legislature. You could reach the same result where many of these entities are making similar recommendations. It seems like it would all go, if there's going to be any statutorily enacted requirements, it all has to go to the General Assembly for the General Assembly to use as it wields its lawmaking authority.
Yeah, I think that I don't see any conflict with them, and I would hate to if there is legislation required, wherever the report came from, it's going to have to come to the legislature. If there isn't legislation required, then it's going to go to the appropriate training council or wherever it's going to go. And I just my hesitation in, because what we're talking about really is that last part of 124. We're not talking about the rest of 124 at all. There's a lot of stuff in here in 124, but my hesitation in saying that those studies should be put off for 90 days. I want to make sure that the appropriate groups and entities are involved in the conversation. And however you do that, if you do it by, as you suggested, Commissioner, coming up with some kind of a framework and then going out to communities and engaging them and coming up with it. I would hate to see, because, for example, on the body or the release of information, I guess we're talking about, if that was one of them, we were very clear in making sure that the Press Association, for example, was involved in, or the media was involved in that, I believe, and the ACLU was involved in different things. So I don't see them happening separately. I see them as kind of the same process. I don't know why we would put it off.
Again, at your discretion, ma'am. I agree with Betsy Ann's characterization of the different tracks and how they do diverge a bit in their outcomes. All I'm suggesting is that there's a variety of work that's in progress that you may be able to use as a foundation for some of the decisions that you're making. And you'll have the benefit of that within about 30 days. And if we launch another parallel process, it's going to take it'll take another round of work, and we will actually be on 2 different tracks. So it's really just, I guess another way to describe it is, if we wait a little while, there may be less work because we can stack work on top of each other. Versus taking 2 tracks that are going at the same time, we're definitively doubling the amount of work.
Oh, and I don't even see it being 2 tracks. I see it being the same track, just having different people involved in it. I think that having 2 tracks going on at the same time, you're right, would be a waste of time and resources. And so if you're looking at, for example, the statewide, use of military equipment, that's also in 124. So you just do it and you have a report, and the report may be the same report you give to the governor as you give to the legislature. And the same thing with body cams. So I think that we just want recommendations, and we want the community involved in those recommendations. That's what I think where we are. But Senator Clarkson, you're muted.
Trying to be so good. Also, we have some house repairs going on, so I'm trying to keep that at bay. The executive order has no expiration, so this is not tied to the emergency orders. This is an executive order that would stand in perpetuity, and so that's one aspect of this, which is interesting. And not that it preempts legislation and more consideration. It asks for legislative proposals, obviously, and proposes that we discuss things in a legislative format. But yeah. Anyway, I guess my point was just to go to Anthony's and discussing the differences between 124 and the executive order. Is one, we've had some impact as we've all thought about things, and as Michael has been part of our conversation, and he's clearly been very involved in creating and crafting the executive order. So it's been cross-fertilized, and which has been, I hope, helpful. And I don't know. They seem to me separate tracks and together all at the same time. So it's sort of I don't quite know. What, do we take these pieces out?
No.
Do we take these things out of 124? Do we want to modify it at all when it gets back to us?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand why we would do anything if the executive. First of all, the executive order isn't the same kind of executive order as, for example, the one around ethics of appointees. That's something that keeps on going. This, as I understand it, is an executive order that asks for a bunch of reports to come back. When those reports come back, the executive order is over. It isn't as if this is going to keep, I think, but
it's accomplished what it set out to accomplish.
Yeah. But I don't know why we would change it. I think that we've asked for reports by January. So it seems to me that if the timing is, if, as Commissioner, you're saying that your reports are due on October.
Yeah, sooner.
You then have November, December, and part of January to build on those reports to come to the legislature. I don't see us necessarily making any changes or doing anything that I think they fit together very nicely for the most part.
Oh, I do too.
Except, I guess, for the training, which is you were going to talk about. And now, Commissioner, you are muted.
I have some construction in the backyard as well. Not my backyard, an adjacent backyard. We are. Think Vermont. There, I'm looking for the section on training. We have, I think this relates more to the executive order than what you've drafted. But I think we're disadvantaged in both regards, that we don't have an executive director on board at
Yeah.
the moment. It's going to take them a little bit of time to get up to speed. So just one area of concern would be any timelines around the recommendations that relate to training and allowing for the new ED to get up to speed on things and have the requisite input.
When I think about reports that come back, there often are things like this that provide impediments to getting those reports done in a good way by the expected deadline. And my feeling always is that it's better to do the report right and to come in on January 15th, if that's the date, and say, here's where we are right now. We don't have a completed report because our executive director wasn't hired until such a date, and we've been working toward it. So that I'm not concerned about deadlines there.
Okay.
And whether the governor is or not, that's his concern.
Yeah. Oh, so overall, to speak to many of the things that senators have generally brought up, I think you're right. We're going down the same roads, and relative to the work itself, we don't have any grave concerns about the scope of work or the types of things being assigned, be it in the executive order or in the legislation.
I think it's great that everybody's going in a similar direction, and I'm pleased with that. So I don't know how other committee members feel.
I'm happy with it.
Brian?
Yeah.
Sure.
Chris, did you want to, or you just say yep?
I'm just, I had my lunch before, and I didn't want to be eating my sandwich in front of people.
It's okay. We do it in committee.
Yeah, well, no, I'm just beaming in to say, thanks to everyone. I feel like there's a lot of good thinking, and we're moving in the right direction, and we're basically going together. So thank you.
Good. So Ingrid or Matt, do you have anything you'd like to throw in here? Matt?
Do you want to go? Because I know you have to jump off.
No, I don't have a lot to add. I'm happy to speak to anything specific if that's helpful, but.
No, thank you.
No, I don't have anything to add either, only in that I think it is good that we are all going the same direction, and we're trying to accomplish the same thing. So a lot of work is being done right now behind the scenes on this, which I'm happy to report.
Good. And I would assume that your newest hiree is going to keep you on track in terms of hearing from community.
Without question. I think Major Jonas is getting on a call with him shortly. Are you not?
That's correct. I'm about to jump on what seems like a national call with Eitan and Captain Scott to talk about police reform and other changing from within regarding policing. So I agree with your sentiment, Senator White.
Good, thank you. Allison?
And what Ingrid, remind us what Eitan's title is, your new hire.
So he's the co-director for fair and impartial policing and equity advisor, racial equity advisor.
And racial equity advisor. That's thanks.
Chris?
Yeah, I do have a question for our law enforcement team here. And this is just sort of a high-level question. Has it been a surprise to you to see sort of the extent and passion around the discussions that are going on in Vermont or nationally in the last 3-4 months? Was this a surprise, or are we just sort of picking up the pace on a prior conversation?
I'll start by saying part of it is a surprise. The need for, as I like to refer to them, these modernization initiatives has been well known. The energy behind them is not a surprise. The surprising part is the polarization related to this, and frankly, some of the very disappointing mistrust, in particular of Vermont law enforcement, who I think, and I obviously don't have a completely clear perspective on this, but having done this for 30, I don't even want to say it, 31 years now, the folks in Vermont that are in law enforcement do an exceptional job, whether that's in investigations and our ability to deliver empathy and support to victims and survivors of crime, the efforts made, while imperfect, on fair and impartial policing and equity. And we lead the nation in a host of ways and really do an exceptional job. And the scope and depth of mistrust and just the vitriol that has been thrown around is the surprising and incredibly saddening and disappointing piece of the puzzle. Because I think by and large, Vermonters do trust that when you call, you're going to get good service, empathetic service, compassionate service, and you're going to get solid investigations. And that's lost in the hyperbole of the moment.
Can I follow up just briefly? So what's that does seem, thank you for that answer. And in terms of, I don't know what the right word is, healing from this place going forward, what is it that restores, you must be thinking about, how do you restore that trust? How do you diminish that vitriol?
Well, I think like so many things that are stuck in this polarization in America today, it starts with treating each other from every direction with dignity and respect, and doing things based on fact and evidence, kind of like the way our COVID response has worked, and not rumor and innuendo and inaccuracy. That's at the end of the day, that's the most important piece is perspective. And that's not to diminish again, there's a tremendous need for progress. There is this is a moment to leverage this energy. So it's not to diminish that or try to put a brake on that, but let's do it in a way that's respectful and acknowledges the fact that, as I said back in June, early on, the length of the field we've got to travel to score points, if you use the football analogy, is far less than many, many places in the United States. And you can't paint 1 million+ police officers in 18,000 different departments with the same brush.
Ingrid, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think that's really well said. And I think we have to get to that place where, the healing begins. And I don't profess to have the answers to that, but certainly, as the commissioner is saying, treating one another with respect and basing conversations on fact, and acknowledging that reform and change always has to occur, but that we are underway and that we're committed to that mission here in Vermont. I think that's those are important key facts and foundations for the discussion.
And I'm just going to add one thing here. I hope that, because I think there has been a lot of, the word you used, Commissioner, was vitriol. And I don't know that this has made an impact on Gunny's decision to retire. He's the police chief in Brattleboro, but he, in my opinion, is one of the good guys. And I hate to see him retire, and I don't know if any of this has added to his decision, but I would hate to see that happen with people who we really need to keep involved in this conversation. So I hope
Yeah,
that doesn't
I
impact.
appreciate that comment. I think we've already seen it, unfortunately, in Vermont with Chief
Mhm.
Morrison opting not to come
Yep.
back under the circumstances. And you're not
Mhm.
going to find a more progressive with a little p police chief anywhere in the country. And, you know, without the tools to do the job, you're set up for success right out of the gate. If I did an interview a couple of days ago with 7 Days, and I described that the challenge here, the challenge for you and for us, is to take this moment of energy and advocacy and translate it into pragmatic public policy. It's both the brilliance and the challenge of representative government. It is very hard to achieve, but it's incredibly important, especially given the topics at hand. So I appreciate you letting me editorialize a bit on that.
We like editorializing. Anybody else? Matt, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the Commissioner and Major Jonas said it best, and I support their comments. I think, you know, we are lucky to be in Vermont. I know the Vermont State Police has been working for over a decade on these issues. We've had our Fair and Impartial Policing Committee for over a decade. We have been working on race data for over a decade before it was statutorily mandated. And we've had the relationships that exist now for years. We didn't have to scramble or build relationships in the last few months. So what's important to recognize is that a ton of work has been happening over time, and it certainly has accelerated and should accelerate. And we are partners with everybody in this in ensuring that we're progressing law enforcement to where it needs to be. But the Commissioner's right. There's a tremendous amount of vitriol that it's not productive, and it's hurting the profession. And what I worry about long term when we talk about that is, you know, you see these good people leaving the profession, and it scares me to think about what's left or who would be coming in after. And what I don't want to see is a decaying of the profession to a level where it's actually going to go in the wrong direction, away from positive reforms and reinvestment in police and training and hiring the right people. Because if we don't do that, it will decay to a point where it's a police force that nobody wants, and it'll be people who should not be in this uniform. So there's an incredible balance that we're starting to see tip a little bit, and it should worry us a little bit. When Jennifer Morrison walks away, you know, I don't know. I'm with the Commissioner. I don't know who else would come in behind her that has tremendous experience and ideas and energy. So good conversation. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have anything they'd like to throw in here? Well, thank you. I think that in terms of the executive order, I don't have any concerns about it. I just wanted to make sure that we were kind of all on the same page here and that there weren't any conflicts that we needed to address. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your continued work and your thoughtfulness on this and all the topics that impact public safety in Vermont.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
And thank you
Talk
for
to you
being
later.
active partners. Good,
Yes.
good work.
Yep. So, Betsy, do you want to go through any changes in 124 that they're considering?
Yes, hi. Thank you to Gail. She posted for you on your webpage House GovOps working strike all amendment. So does it work for all of you to pull it up separately? So we
I
see-
can try.
Okay,
Yeah, it's right here. If you refresh, you're going to have to refresh.
Okay.
yeah, it's just under my name, S124 draft 2.1. And let me know when you're ready to go through it and give you a high-level overview.
Okay,
I would say, go ahead and start.
Go ahead and start. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an annotated strike all, so it shows in yellow highlighting language that would be added to the bill as passed the Senate, and then in red strike through language that would be removed from the bill as passed the Senate. So it started out with the Criminal Justice Training Council, and what's just going on here in section 1 is just to update the definition or the general description of the council and what it was created for and its purpose. One of the things you'll see on page 1, line 18, if you remember when the council was testifying in Senate GovOps, there was testimony, I think, from their director of training who advised that the council prefers to use the term law enforcement applicant rather than recruit. They're moving away
Yeah.
from that term recruit. And so the bill as passed the Senate, though, I didn't catch that one use of recruit still in there in the description of the council, that it's created to maintain a uniform standard of training for recruits and officers. So this would get updated to say basic training for law enforcement applicants and then in-service training for officers, meaning our certified officers. On page 2, what it would do is add to the description of the council its current law duties to professionally regulate officers, with the description being that the council maintains statewide standards of officer professional conduct by accepting and tracking complaints alleging officer unprofessional conduct, adjudicating charges of it, and imposing sanctions after the council finds an officer committed unprofessional conduct. And then on line 6, there's just language to, right now, current law says the council offers instruction to officers. And this is also just adding, and they also approve, because they can also approve training for officers. So that's just an update. Section 2 gets into the membership of the council, as I had mentioned previously. So just a refresher, the LEAB really is made up of appointees who have a law enforcement focus. Either they are law enforcement officers, or there's also the Defender General is a member, the U.S. Attorney is on there also. But it's other than those two, it's really law enforcement officers that are making recommendations on law enforcement issues. Whereas the council, so the council is the entity that sets the standards for training, provides training, certifies, and professionally regulates law enforcement officers. And you had proposed amendments to the makeup of the council, and the House is considering further amendments to the council. The committee has discussed big picture, making more of a balance between law enforcement related members and more members of the public, so that there's more of a balance on the council in that regard. So one of the things that they're considering now is, so as passed the Senate, the bill would have expanded the council from 12 members to 20. And this would have a total of 21 members, and revising the membership a little bit from what you had suggested to change up the membership a bit. The House is currently considering removing the Commissioner of Corrections, who's a current law member, and removing your suggestion to add the Commissioner of Mental Health. And then on page 4, whereas the Senate would say 3 public members appointed by the governor, this language would add 6 public members. 5 of them are appointed by the governor. At least one of the governor's appointees has to be a social worker, and at least one of them has to be a person who has experience living with mental conditions or a psychiatric disability. And then the 6th public member would be jointly elected by the Vermont chapters of the NAACP. I should have said at the beginning where GovOps is at right now, House GovOps is at right now on this bill. They're still in the discussion phase. These amendments were made at the direction of the chair, House GovOps chair, for the committee's consideration. I know the committee's trying to vote out the bill soon with our looming adjournment, but there's still further discussion to be had, including on whether this is the right makeup of the council and any other portion of it, just to put that on your radar. Should have said that up front.
And I can't, just for your information, I'm on my iPad instead of my computer, so I can't see, for some reason, I can't split the screen. I don't know how to do that.
Okay, how
So-
about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I would say if people, I'm looking at the document, so I'm not seeing anybody. So if people have comments or questions, not about why they might be doing this, but technical questions for Betsy, just, I would say speak up.
Sounds good. And I'll be on the lookout also if there's any hands that
Okay.
go up. And the vice chair too can prompt me if I overlook somebody.
Yeah, he's great at doing that.
Another substantive change here on line 16 of page 4 is that the governor would appoint the chair of the council from among the public members. So it'd be a public member who chairs the council. What is happening currently in practice, statute doesn't control who is chair. And there is a section of current law that allows the council to set its own procedures, and testimony to House GovOps was that the council itself elects its own chair. And that person right now is Chief Brickell. On page 5 in section 3, there's just a new deadline to appoint the new membership of November 15th of this year. One of the members expressed concern about whether that's too soon. And Senator Clarkson has a question.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just confused. I think in most bodies, it's important for the body to choose its own chair. I'm a little confused. So here the governor is appointing the chair of the council from among the public members. I mean, that seems very prescriptive to me.
Well, I think that,
I'm not sure I'm so okay with that.
but I at this, if I can point out that at this point, they haven't even adopted these yet.
Right.
So
I get it. I would flag that for our discussion.
Well, I've flagged a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I think that Betsy Ann is just going through this
Right.
changes
No,
that they're considering.
Right.
Okay.
No, I hear.
So,
Senator
Okay.
Collmore has a question.
thank you, Betsy Ann. I'm not going to offer my opinion on the policy. I just have a question. The way I read this, it means that no one in law enforcement could possibly be the chair. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is
Okay.
correct. It's currently written.
Thank you.
Because the qualifier to be a public member is you cannot be a law enforcement officer or have a close family member who is, can't be a legislator, and you can't otherwise be employed in the criminal justice system.
Yep.
Thank you.
I am going to keep scrolling through. I'll note on page 5 that the language currently is unchanged about the council needing to adopt rules to identify and implement alternate routes of certification aside from training provided at the academy. And then also at the top of page 6, to offer courses of instruction for officers in different areas of the state and strive to offer non-overnight courses whenever possible. If I can accurately repeat some of the council testimony to House GovOps, as I understand it, a lot of this they are doing already, in that you can get training in other parts of the state, and the issue of overnight training really only goes to the requirement currently of the council to have the basic training for officer applicants to do that 16-week residential Monday through Friday overnight stay. So I think if I'm capturing it correctly, the council was saying, we are doing this already.
Well, except that I think that the one part does say reconsider the 16-week residential. It isn't just think of other trainings that could happen that don't require overnight. It's also asking them to reconsider whether or not we need 16 weeks of residential, and if it all needs to be at the same time. So, and I know that they're doing this, and they told us that too, but we decided to hold their feet to the fire.
I hear you, Madam Chair. I'm just passing on what they were saying.
Yeah.
I didn't hear any indication from the council. I can't speak for them. I didn't hear any indication that they were considering changing the 16-week basic training overnight requirement, but
I know, we'll deal with that next year.
yeah. I will note on, oh,
Chip in
sorry,
for a
am I
second.
interrupting somebody? Go ahead.
Yeah,
No,
sorry. On the, yeah, so I guess we'll do it next year. So I'll hold my water. I was just going to say, we also had that whole conversation about 16 weeks is a pretty small container. We keep talking about adding new aspects of training, and what are we going to push out of the container because there's not enough room for it anymore. So I hope we don't go the direction of, I don't know what the new balance is, but it feels to me like when I learned this session that in Europe, you're in training for something like 2 years, it made me appreciate that 16 weeks it's not very long.
I'm going to throw this out and then we should get on with, because I'm violating my own rules here, but I think that it isn't the question of whether it's 16 weeks or not. It's whether it needs to be 16 weeks of residential. 16 weeks may be too short or too long. But the point is, as the mayor from Winooski pointed out, and the police chief from Winooski pointed out, that they had, for example, a single mother who wanted to become a police officer, and there was no way she could do 16 weeks of residential overnight away from her family. But she would have made a great police officer. So it isn't the time itself, it's how it's delivered. So now I'll try not to violate my own rules anymore.
You're the chair. Okay. I'll note on page 7, in regard to the transition from level 2 to level 3. So as passed the Senate, this language is currently remaining unchanged, that this language as passed the Senate said by July 1, 2021, a level 2 certified officer should be able to transition to level 3 using either portfolio, experiential learning, or CLEP testing without having to restart the certification process. And I just noted that the council's testimony to House GovOps last week was that the council needs additional resources to actually make this happen in practice. That was
Of
my
course they do.
understanding from the chair of the council. So I was just flagging that issue of the council's feedback.
Yep.
On page 6, this was just there's a report back requirement from the executive director of the council on how things are going in restructuring these training requirements in accordance with what was up in section 4 and 5. And to address that, the council is getting a new executive director. The proposal in House GovOps is just to push out the council reporting requirements a bit to acknowledge the work that the person will have to do to come into the executive director role. So this is just pushing out that report back from January 15 of next year to March 1. On page 8, there was the language as passed the Senate that an agency, in order to enjoy the resources of the council, including training at the academy or any other council services, had to be in compliance with the roadside stop data collection and any other policy required by the council chapter. And pursuant to a recommendation that Representative Donahue made in a separate part of the bill, House GovOps is considering also adding the requirement that an agency has to be in compliance with the current law requirement in 18 VSA section 7257A, that agencies report to the Office of Attorney General when one of the agency's officers has an interaction in a mental health crisis and there is death or serious bodily injury resulting. So it would add that to be able to enjoy council services, you also have to be in compliance with that reporting requirement that's required by current law. I am skipping ahead to bottom of page 9. There's that section 8 requirement for a potential hiring agency to contact an officer's current agency to get an analysis of the officer's performance there. And on page 11 in your section 9 as passed the Senate, there was a transitional provision to say that requirement to disclose an officer's performance does not apply if there's a binding non-disclosure agreement in effect that would prohibit that. the House is currently considering leaving that in, but adding language on page 11 to prohibit moving forward collective bargaining agreements, an agreement between an agency and an officer that would prohibit the exchange of information between the employing agency and another agency about the officer's performance at the employing agency. So that moving forward, there couldn't be those types of agreements. And so relatedly, oh, sorry, Madam Chair.
No, but I thought that lines 11 through 13, that says the same thing, right? Because the way Commissioner Sherling explained it was that it's only binding agreements that took place before the effective date of the bill. So implying that any agreement that was reached after the signing of the bill wouldn't have any impact. So isn't it just making it clearer that that's what was meant?
Yes, I mean, I think it is getting at the same thing, though. I did discuss it with our labor attorney. It seemed to be just addressing it more fully. I'll go back and look at it again. But this would make it explicit in that new sub C on page 11 that CBAs can't prohibit the exchange of information about an officer's performance. One of the things to note is that House GovOps, if they will pursue this, they want additional language to make it clear that this is not saying that the information should be made public, that if there's a confidentiality in that, in the CBA about sharing information that, and if an agency does share information about an officer's performance, the agency who receives that information should not publicize it to maintain confidentiality.
Okay.
Okay, on page 12 in section 9A, there was the language as passed the Senate that agencies and officers have to comply with the LEAB's model body camera policy. And within that model body camera policy itself, it was saying that the policy applies for officers who are authorized to use body cams. But so the first thing that House GovOps considered is just making it more explicit that the requirement to follow a model body camera policy is only required if an officer actually uses a body cam. It's not in any way a requirement for all agencies to use body cams. So that was just a technical clarification on the language. But then, as I had stated earlier, the House committee is considering moving the model body cam policy authority from the LEAB to the council. So that's what is going on here on line 8 of page 12, eliminating reference to the LEAB and establishing the council. Just noting that council will mean the newly constituted council with its new membership.
Allison?
So the implication of that is that because the council will be more expanded, have more non-law enforcement people on it, that somehow it will be a better body to make this decision? I mean, what fueled this idea?
I can't describe legislative intent with specificity. I can just say that the general conversation in House GovOps, there was a conversation about the differences in the membership between LEAB versus council.
And that's the big difference, is there more members of the public now that propose more members of the public on the council, and the House GovOps committee had more confidence in the public, the body with more public members than the body with more law enforcement members.
I think it isn't just public members, but also remember the council has now members from the from Human Rights Commission, and from or not members from there, but appointed by there, and also from victims.
Yeah, no, a much broader,
Yeah,
a much broader universe of people who are impacted by law enforcement and law enforcement. Yeah. Got it.
Okay.
All right, I'm moving on. I am on page 12 in the first new section that the House is considering adding, the House Committee is considering adding, which would be a prohibition on facial recognition or other biometric matching technology. This is just a first draft of this language. If they will pursue this, they discussed just needing to consider all of the ramifications. Right now, this has an exception for drones, because the drone law does allow the use of facial recognition technology if it's being on a drone, if it's being used, for example, for non-criminal investigative reasons, such as a search and rescue operation, or pursuant to a warrant. So a drone right now under law could have facial recognition technology if it's permitted by a warrant. So if the House Committee will pursue this language, there likely will need to be further tweaks to this language if they do want to allow facial recognition technology, for example, to be used for search and rescue operations generally. There's also a question about fingerprinting and whether this language would prohibit biometric matching technology if that would extend to fingerprinting. So more conversation and review of the language is necessary here, but it's an initial proposal that they're considering.
May I just say
Yeah,
that?
Allison, you may.
Thank you. I mean, I think that there are many good things. I mean, I'm a little concerned with the total prohibition on this, given that these are, when used well, can be incredibly productive tools for both sides, for everybody who's trying to investigate and understand and know things. I have a hard time with fully prohibiting things that are just in some cases in the infancy of their applications. So anyway,
I hear you.
Yeah.
I think groups like the ACLU, I could be wrong, but I think like the ACLU and some other groups have said similar things. And what they're saying is that nobody should be allowed to use this stuff until there's a policy that sort of oversees how it would be used. I think that's what they're getting at. I could be wrong. I'm not saying that, I don't know if that's what the House was getting at, but that's what other folks have been getting at, is that they don't want it just to start up organically. They want to have a policy that measures how such technology would be used.
well, then we could, right. Well, we'll visit this when we get this language, but we could say,
well,
we could do policy before
they
prohibit.
haven't, let's, I think this is a little premature since they haven't really even decided if they're going to have this in there yet or not.
Right.
And you're putting Betsy in a tough position too, because she can't comment on.
Right. Betsy Ann is trying to tell us what the issues are that they're considering and changing. And some of them so I'll try and keep in touch with Sarah Copenhanses about where they are with each of these things. And I might send her a note just saying, some of these present more issues maybe than others. And so anyway, I think that we can't, we can't, it's a little premature for us to talk about the implications of it because we don't know what they're going to do.
Okay.
All right. I'm on page 13. And so the bill as passed the Senate would have amended, if you scroll over to page 14, that definition of what constitutes category B conduct, to not only say the current law list is a list, not just examples of what might be category B conduct, but then you also change the excessive use of force from second to first offense. Well, the General Assembly already made all of those changes in S219, which is as enacted, Act 147, and then some. And so you don't need to make the changes again. You've already done that. So that's why this language would be struck, because General Assembly already made those changes. So I'm going to keep scrolling. Page 15, no change to the Senate passed proposal on line 9 of page 15 about when agencies have to report allegations of Category B conduct. Current law says it's after an agency conducts a valid investigation and then deems it credible. As passed the Senate, the language was the agency receives a credible complaint. So that has not changed under this version. Nor in on page 16, line 7, the Senate passed a requirement for the Council Advisory Committee to get a copy of an agency's investigative report and supporting docs when they report allegations of unprofessional conduct to the council. Just a reminder that Council Advisory Committee is a group of 5 gubernatorial appointees, 4 members without a law enforcement connection, and 1 retired officer. Then section 10A gets to that report back that you've been discussing with the commissioner and Department of Public Safety. And so one of the changes here, so overall the required report back date is January 15, 21 for all of the reporting entities, and in line with that acknowledgement of the new executive director of the council and the new membership of the council, the House committee is currently considering saying, except that the council is not required to submit a verbal progress report until March 1 of next year, and then recommendations for legislative action on April 1, just to give them more time.
Is that related only to the training section? Because it sounds like anything that the council is supposed to be reporting on, they don't have to do until then.
It's for all of these recommendations that the council is responsible for reporting back to the GovOps committees here in this section 10.
So we're putting them all off until April of 2021.
Yes, as currently drafted. Although any other entities that are required to report would still be under the January 15 deadline, but
Okay.
yeah, as currently written.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So on page 17, the first topic is the law enforcement officer qualifications, and you'll see this in a few other places. The Senate had described specific entities that the reporting entities had to consult with before making their report. And here in sub 1B is the requirement for the council to specifically consult with statewide racial justice groups and statewide groups representing people who experience mental conditions and psychiatric disabilities in their report back to the GovOps committees on training recommendations. Oh, excuse me, that was qualifications. Sorry. Number 1 is law enforcement officer qualifications. Number 2 is law enforcement officer training. And so there again is adding those 2, reference to those 2 groups, statewide groups, racial justice groups, and statewide groups representing people who experience mental conditions and psychiatric disabilities. No change on page 18, lines 3 and 4, about the council reviewing training to ensure that it helps recognize and respond to people who have mental conditions. It was just a flag to the committee here that in S-219, now Act 147, the legislature did commit to evaluating whether and how to gather data regarding interactions between officers and people with mental health issues. And I just flagged for them that there is that current law requirement for agencies to report to the AG's office when there's interaction in a mental health crisis that results in death or bodily injury. In here, where are we? We are still in officer training. Page 18, subsection C, lines 16 and 17, House committee is considering removing the language that would require the council, LEAB, and DPS to consult with VLCT in order to determine whether the academy should be relocated to a different area of the state.
Wait a minute, tell me that, where are you again?
That is on page 18, lines 16 and 17.
So they don't want to have a report on that?
No, as currently written.
Interesting. Okay,
On page 19, the third topic of models of civilian oversight. This was an AG report back, and they are currently considering adding in that the requirement for the AG's office to specifically consult with Vermont Law School's Center for Justice Reform, and also those statewide groups on racial justice and representing people who experience mental conditions and psychiatric disabilities. In number 4, the topic of reporting allegations of officer misconduct, adding in that the AG's office would need to consult with those statewide groups. I'm on page 20 in regard to the 6th topic, body cameras. This is related to the change earlier in the bill that it would be the council that has the model body cam policy authority, and rather than the LEAB. This would change the Senate passed language that said the LEAB had to report any changes it deemed necessary to its 2016 model policy, and instead say that the council shall recommend a model body cam policy for use by agencies and officers. And then in 6, what did Tucker call it? A Romanette number 2?
yes, Romanette.
Which was new to me, and I'm gonna have to try to use that every time now. Adding in that it would be the council that would specifically recommend policies for responding to public records requests and retention timelines and the issues of body camera footage storage, and then adding in that they would have to do that after consulting with the statewide groups on racial justice and people who experience mental conditions and psychiatric disabilities. And then on page 20, line 15, sub B was that requirement for DPS to consult with LEAB about the possibility of having a statewide group purchasing contract for the body cams and storage. And so related to up above where the council would have the model body cam policy authority, would add in the council there. And at the bottom of the page, the last topic is military equipment. And so this would have the council, instead of the LEAB, recommend a statewide policy on officers' acquisition of military equipment rather than use of. So what would be permissible to acquire to begin with, not, if you acquire it, if you can't use it after you acquire it, I think was part of the discussion. So acquiring military equipment. And it was neat, actually, the vice chair of House GovOps had a list of some of the military equipment that agencies have been able to obtain. And aside from rifles, it was things that this committee was discussing, like, just normal trucks and snow plows and that sort of thing. So that was interesting. On page 21, section B would be a new section. This would require the GAC, the Government Accountability Committee. Senator Collmore is co-chair on the Senate side. It would require the GAC to consult with the Executive Director of Racial Equity and the Social Equity Caucus and the Chief Performance Officer, and accept recommendations from others in order to approve population level indicators that demonstrate the quality of life for Vermonters who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, BIPOC, as those relate to the current 10 outcomes we have in law for the state. And then once GAC approves them by next March, then the CPO would report on those indicators in addition to the other ones in the annual state outcomes report. So just getting specific data on how well Vermonters who are BIPOC are faring in the state.
So can I don't know that this is, I don't know if I agree or disagree with this, but why does it have any place in this bill? This bill has to do with law enforcement and EMS services. Doesn't have anything to do with our state outcomes.
I have the same question.
And
Oh,
why, were they just looking for a place to put it?
no, I think the data, you know, we use, every agency and department is able to use the GAC data. And the data informs, in this case, and we have so many areas of that we have referred to earlier in this bill and that are in the executive order that are address racial equity within law enforcement and racial justice within law enforcement. It strikes me that this is complementary and would create more data that would be useful for law enforcement and for state government.
I don't read it that way. I read it that the data is already being collected by people, and that what needs to happen is that there needs to be an indicator added to the 10 indicators or whatever we call them on the population level quality of care of life outcomes, that we need to add one around people of color and communities of color.
Then
Isn't that what this is saying? This isn't saying.
Yeah, no, you're right. I thought it was an expansion of data. Then I think it may just be a vehicle for getting this language put in for this year. But I think it's an important indicator to add.
I think it's there's a relevance in that the indicators would relate to things like interaction with the police and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not advocating for it to be there or not as part of the bill, but I think there is certainly a connection there between their quality of life and interactions with the police and other similar things.
Right. I agree. And if this may be their only vehicle for adding this in this session, and I think it's an important indicator to add.
Well, it is interesting because GAC meets over the summer, and it could have come to the GAC committee to put in its report for January.
It didn't, I take it?
We haven't met. I mean, we meet over the fall. So we have 3 meetings, I believe, right, Brian? You're the
Yeah, and there's
chair?
no section here with law enforcement that I can read in the language.
Yeah. I think this should be in the GAC report. But anyway, we can talk about that when we get there.
Yep.
All right, I am on page 22, and the new section that is proposed is actually would amend the language that you recently passed in S219 Act 147. This K that is shown here on line 4 was actually added by S219, and big picture, it says that law enforcement agencies can't get a state grant unless they're in compliance with the current law requirements to collect race data on roadside stops. And this would add to it, or the requirement under current law to report to the AG any officers' interactions in a mental health crisis that resulted in death or serious bodily injury. I'll just also note that in that requirement that the General Assembly added in S219 about this grant contingency, it's currently seems to apply only to local law enforcement agencies, and House GovOps discussed today extending that to apply to all agencies, not just the local muni police ones. I am moving on. I'm on page 8 or 22. I'll just note on line 12 that reader assistance heading regarding the VCIC would be struck, because up above another reader assistance heading was added to be in regard to data collection and analysis generally. And so that VCIC language is under that umbrella. If you scroll through section 11 on page 23, the as passed Senate language required VCIC to establish and provide training on a uniform list of definitions that agencies could use when entering crime data into their system of records, the Valcor or Spillman record system, and required every officer to use those definitions. And the House Committee is considering saying that BCIC would establish those definitions and provide training on them after consulting with the Vermont Crime Research Group and the statewide racial justice groups and statewide groups representing people who experience mental conditions and psychiatric disabilities. You can keep scrolling through all the LEAB provisions because right now the House Committee is not considering any amendments to the language as passed the Senate. The Senate language, as you recall, was just striking it, the LEAB, from where it currently exists in law to where it should, and putting it where it should go under the chapter of DPS, and then adding a couple members to it, and then updating the quorum requirements accordingly. None of that is proposed to change under this current strikeout draft. But if you go to page 27, you'll see the next substantive issue goes to the Department of Public Safety's dispatch charging, the charges for DPS performing dispatch functions for state and municipal entities and emergency medical services. So the language as passed the Senate would have required, if you keep scrolling to the top of page 29, it would have required the Commissioner of Public Safety to adopt rules that set forth the rates for dispatches that DPS could charge, because DPS has the current law authority to charge for DPS's performance of dispatch. This would remove that dispatch rulemaking authority, the rate rulemaking authority. I'll just note that yellow that appears starting at the bottom of page 27. It's just provided for reference, just to show what the other portions of the statute are about. So no change, no substantive changes to the other current law language. What would change in regard to the fee structure for dispatch rates, if you keep scrolling to page 31, you would see the House is currently considering striking that rulemaking authority and adding a new section starting on line 9 that says, notwithstanding that statutory provision that allows DPS to charge for its performance of dispatch, DPS shall not charge to cover the costs of its performance of dispatch functions until the General Assembly enacts in law the fee structure for those charges. So big picture, it is would transfer the authority to set the rates to the General Assembly and prohibit DPS from charging for dispatch until the General Assembly sets the dispatch rates. On line 17, on this page, what page are we on here? 31. This would require, by next January, DPS to consult with a variety of different entities, VLCT, MSAC, Police Chiefs Association, State Firefighters Association, and local agencies in order to recommend to the GovOps committees, House Ways and Means, and Senate Finance, an equitable dispatch fee structure for the department to charge for dispatching EMS, police, and fire, and potential funding mechanisms for those charges that don't rely on property taxes. I think that was the last substantive
Brian
change.
has a hand up. Brian has a
Oh,
hand
pardon, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Senator. So Betsy Ann, the legislature will come up with the rate. When will that go into effect?
Yeah, right now there is, the way that this is drafted currently, there is no deadline for the General Assembly to enact that fee structure.
So a municipality that, when we passed, it had 3 years, I think, to,
Yes.
the DPS folks had 3 years to come up with that fee. The legislature has to come up with that fee by next January. or get a report on it by January, but there's no date by which a municipality would have to begin paying DPS for dispatching services.
That's correct, as currently written.
Thank you. So I know someone's going to ask me that.
And through the end of the bill, there are no changes to the EMS provisions or the public safety town plan provision. The last thing hanging out there on page 50 is what the effective date should be. And I'm done, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, I'm back.
It's like magic.
It's like magic. It's nice to see you all. So, I don't know, because I don't know where they are with these. Who asked these changes to be drafted up for discussion? Or did it come from the committee itself?
This was at the direction of the chair, and the committee reviewed it this morning at their meeting.
Okay, so I don't know if this is even kosher to do, but because we're really limited on time here, I wonder if the committee thinks that it is reasonable for me to write a note to get in touch with Sarah and to point out some of the places where we might have concerns. Not just point them out and kind of say what the concerns were. So if you think that's a good idea, let's take the next 15 minutes to go through to point out some of these areas where we think we might have concern. I know, Brian, you have concern. Do you think it's a good idea for me to do that just so that we can keep in touch?
Well,
I think
No,
so.
Allison.
it's that, or we meet with them and that could turn into a long, long meeting.
Yeah.
I
Allison?
think, Madam Chair, as much as we're able to resolve in the House, the better.
Okay.
And to go to Brian's point, you know, if they dig in, and then it comes to us, then we have a conference committee. We have 2.5 weeks. I mean,
We won't have a conference committee.
We have
Right.
one-
Well, we
So
can't.
this is helping us preempt that.
Yeah, okay. So then let us look at areas where we might have some issues. I think there's going to be pushback from removing the Department of Corrections Commissioner. We removed him before and he asked to be put back on.
Correct.
And also, I think the Mental Health Commissioner, I don't know why they would remove that person.
Yes, particularly given all the
agree.
people they add later.
I
Okay,
agree.
so how about the addition of the 5 appointees by the governor?
What did we have, 3?
We had 3 and they couldn't be connected to law enforcement in any way. We didn't say who they had to be. These are 5 and 1 has to be a social worker, 1 has to be a mental health consumer, and 1 has to be elected by the membership of the NAACP in the state, which is going to be almost impossible to do because, I'm a member of the NAACP down here and I've never been asked to vote on anything. But regardless of that, I don't have any issues with that.
It's getting
Yeah, I
pretty
think
big.
that's fine.
21.
Yeah, it is big, but, okay, and the governor appointing the chair?
I have challenges with that. I mean, I think everybody, I think that a body needs to elect its own chair. I don't think it needs to be dictated.
Well, we have many instances where it is. The Legislative Apportionment Board, for example.
Right.
The chair is appointed. I think
But
I can't say where, but I'm not gonna go to battle over that one. I don't know
Well,
if
but it's
anybody else
limiting.
is.
It's limiting it to only the public members.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I have a modest issue with that. I think it should be open to all members.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I think the conversation these days is a lot about is putting, community members more oversight over policing in general. So this would go along with that.
Besides, often the chair has less in.
Fine.
But
No, that's true, Anthony. It does support that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I don't think you
Okay.
can, well,
Huh?
I'm troubled by the fact that it can't be somebody from law enforcement.
Yeah, I don't know how, I don't feel strongly about one way or the other. You can have appointed chairs and you can have leadership that emerges from within. So, but, so I'll say we have some concerns about that. Mainly they did some pushing out of the dates and training. The AG report, having to report to the AG on if there's death or bodily injury from mental health. Anybody have any issues with that?
No.
No.
And the collective bargaining, that it makes it clear that it isn't necessarily made public just because it's given to the other agency. I have no problem with that. Anybody?
No.
No.
And I think, Betsy Ann, that does clarify what our intent was. Okay, moving the body cams from LEAB to the council, the policy.
Sorry, what page? I got lost. What page?
I
are
don't
we-
know. I just was making notes. as we were
12 page.
going.
It's around page 12.
I guess
Thanks,
I don't
right.
have a strong feeling one way or the other who comes up with a model policy.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't care too much either.
Well, but the model policy, again, if it goes to the council, it'll have more public input rather
Yes.
than just.
I'm gonna, the prohibition on biometric matching technology, we have issues with because we don't know
Yes.
where they're going with it.
I
I don't
have-
want to, we're just so that you know, in 10 minutes, we are leaving this meeting. So I'd like to just flag areas and,
Yep.
okay, and report back, not until March. I would like to say that they need to make a progress report by January and instead of a progress report by March. They can make a progress report by January
Fine.
On what subject?
on their training council subjects, the reports.
Oh, I'm sorry, because you're skipping it. Okay, great.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just going through the notes that I wrote down that were
No,
areas of
I
concern.
realized I wasn't as good about.
Okay, so I don't know why they would cross off moving to another area of the state.
Yeah, that seems kind of random.
I mean, are there people in there from Pittsburgh? On Gov. So,
There's somebody from Chittenden, but not Pittsburgh.
okay, well, I'm gonna just point that out as it's just them to look at it.
Right.
And then I do know, Brian, that you have issues around the GAC section,
Yes. Yeah.
and I do too. I don't think it belongs here.
Yeah. Not about doing it, but putting it in this bill.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to know what their reasoning is.
Because I think they're looking for a place to put it.
Well, I'm not opposed to including it in GAC as an indicator. So I don't mind using this. And there are some there's a lot that's pertinent. So I don't mind it being here. And it would just be interesting maybe to find out why they chose this as the vehicle. I mean, it's a more appropriate vehicle than a charter.
No. The point is that the GAC committee is supposed to meet and review constantly the outcomes and the indicators.
Oh, I see. You'd
That's
rather
where
have the-
that responsibility lies. And then it each year makes recommendations to the legislature to change the outcomes or to change the indicators. And here, this is completely bypassing GAC and is
Got it.
saying
So this
GAC
preempting.
is supposed to do this.
Got it.
Exactly.
Got
And
it.
now I'm surprised that the House members who are on GAC didn't,
Maybe they proposed it.
or maybe there aren't any left from GovOps on there, because Maida Thompson is the vice chair, right?
Right.
And is Jessica, oh, she's still on there, right? Anyway.
No, she's not. I don't think she is.
Okay, anyway, I'm gonna bring that one up as an issue.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Any
that it?
other issues that you want to raise? One might be Brian, putting some parameters around the fee structure for dispatch and stuff to the legislature, saying that there has to be some phasing in or whatever. I don't know how you would do that.
I think that's important. Yep.
Okay,
Isabel, go lay down. Oops.
I will send this note, or I'll get in touch with Sarah and John Gannon, who's the vice chair. And Betsy Ann, do you know who on their committee is the kind of one that leads around law enforcement stuff? And EMS is Jim Harrison, but they didn't make any changes there.
It's been mostly the chair, the vice chair, and Representative Colston of Winooski.
Colston, okay. Okay, I'll contact all three of those. And just, okay, great.
And then Representative Harrison also, I think that he's been expressing interest in regarding to the dispatch issue. And I think
Okay.
the police academy issue, since he's nearby.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, Betsy Ann.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, this was great. I'm impressed with
was.
the time we had available. Good work.
Okay, so now how do we handle this? Gail, are we going out of this meeting and then entering another one?
Yes.
You
Yes,
are.
Yes, we believe this.
And Mike Ferrant sent us the link to that.
You did.
Yes, he did.
Mike
Okay.
is covering for Ron Wild, so yes,
Okay.
use Mike's link.
Okay,
Got it.
so bye, everybody.